So, having looked at the basics of human eye and human vision, I thought it was interesting here. Structural dissimilarity versus functional equivalence, anatomy versus physiology. So, classes in comparative anatomy and physiology are really interesting. If you get a chance to take one, I highly recommend it. So, you look at a fish eye, which is set up much like our eye is, and look at an octopus eye. Look at how it's different. The ganglion cells all converge outside of the eyeball rather than inside the retina, like they do in the vertebrates like us. And then remember how light has to first come in through, it has to go past all those other cells before it gets to the photoreceptor in our eye? Seemed kind of crazy. I mean, light has to dodge all this other crap in order to make it to the photoreceptor. But look at the octopus. Their photoreceptors are right up at the edge of the retina. And octopuses, by the way, have outstanding vision. Right? They have excellent vision. Octopuses are actually very smart too. And octopus is not octopi. That's look that up for yourself. Octopodes is also acceptable, but octopi is just flat out wrong. Ultraviolet light, so some animals like birds and bees can see in the ultraviolet range where we can't. Flower, for example, can have a bullseye that's visible only in UV light, and that guides the pollinator to where the pollen is. So when you look at a flower, you see this. You can't see ultraviolet light, but bees, for example, can. Some birds can as well. And so what they see is like a target. In other words, it's like the flower is advertising its pollen to the pollinator. Pretty dang cool, don't you think? And then rattlesnakes, look at this. Holy smoke. Rattlesnakes, see where it says that there's the nostril and then there's the loreal pit. The loreal pit has a heat sensing organ in it. You can see in the lower left. They're trying to show where it is. It's inside of there, all right, inside of that hole. They can see into the infrared range. They have this special heat sensor there in the scale between the eye and the nostril, the loreal scale. There's the loreal pit. They can detect differences in temperature as small as several thousandths of a degree Celsius. So they have excellent night vision. They get thermal images. That's why they hunt at night, which is what they do. So when they're out there in the dark and a little pack rat runs by, they don't get a visual signal from it, but they get a heat image instead. And so they see something, we can't really see what they see, but this is like a representation of it. They're seeing that little pack rat all lit up in the dark. They know exactly where it is. They can strike right at it. That's also why, you don't get, if you're out hiking at night and stuff, you probably have stepped near a rattlesnake. And they basically saw that it was you're too big to eat, and unless they're feeling directly threatened, they're not going to strike at you. Rattlesnakes have no animosity towards humans. They mostly just want to avoid us. So thank rattlesnakes for their night vision, their heat sensors. That's probably why you haven't already been bitten by a rattlesnake. It saw you and it left you alone. So here, just following up on that. Bees don't see UV light. You see UV light, but don't see long wavelengths well. So there you see our vision compared to a bee's vision. All right, they don't see very well in the reds and oranges, but they see up there into the ultraviolet. And dogs are dichromats. So look, your human view, you see the full spectrum of color. And dogs see a very limited range. They have essentially a form of a red-green blindness. So they only see that, all right? And depth perception doesn't work when your eyes are closed, all right? So which statement is false? The cornea provides most of the refraction for the eye. Dilator pupillae muscles innervated by cranial nerve 3. Glaucoma results from difficulty in draining the aqueous humor. Myopic individuals have difficulty focusing on distant objects. Cones are found mostly in the macula lutea. 4 of those are true. 1 of those is wrong. Which one is wrong? Yeah, cranial nerve 3 is the constrictor pupillae. Dilator come from the sympathetic nervous system going through the cervical ganglion. So let's move over and talk about hearing. I talked about this already in the anatomy PowerPoint, so I'm not going to give a lot of I'm not going to repeat a lot of what I did there. So the outer ear, the auricle, the external auditory canal, the tympanic membrane, middle ear, the ossicles, and the auditory tube to equalize pressure, and the inner ear, which is the cochlea, the semicircular canals, the vestibule. Okay? The auricle or the pinna directs sound into the ear. It's very funny. If you you can even try right now. If you like, pin your ears back, the sound things will sound different. In other words, your brain has gotten used to the way that your ear bends the sound. Sometimes actors who wear, makeup, or not just makeup, but some kind of costume, some kind of mask or whatever, like Spock in Star Trek. Your hearing is a lot different when you put that stuff on because it changes the shape of your ear, and your brain doesn't exactly know how to interpret it the same way. Auditory canal is about 1 inch long. There are ceruminous glands in there. Remember, insects find it distasteful, apparently. A perforated eardrum, you can see there in the lower right, that's where you punch a hole in the eardrum. It's said to be very painful. I've never done it. Trauma, infection, explosions, loud sounds. I've seen this happen, somebody using an air compressor, like at a gas station, to inflate a tire. They weren't paying attention, they overinflated it, blew the tire up. People have actually died that way, but it has also ruptured eardrums. It just simply blows a hole in your tympanic membrane, or blows it open. They sometimes do it intentionally, as you see there in the far lower right. Kids that get chronic ear infections, they'll insert a tube in there in order to allow the stuff to escape. A lot of kids get colds all the time. That auditory tube gets blocked up. All the gunk in there can't drain out. So you put a tube there to let it drain out the other way, all right? And normally as the kid grows, eventually the tube will just pop out. So the middle ear, air-filled cavity in the temporal bone, malleus attached to the tympanic membrane, mechanical transmission of sound, all right? Auditory tube equalizes external pressure. That's why the little kids scream in the airplanes when that pressure builds up. That's why in the airplanes they tell you to chew gum, yawn. What you're doing basically is you're trying to just open up that auditory tube to equalize the pressure. So the labyrinths, the bony labyrinth, the cochlea, which registers sounds, semicircular canals, which are for motion, acceleration, and the vestibule, which has the static equilibrium or balance receptors. Lined with periosteum, filled with perilymph, like cerebrospinal fluid, very similar. The membranous labyrinth. So there are sacs and tubules inside the bony labyrinth, filled with endolymph, endo inside. The utricle and the saccule. So I mentioned those before. This is where static equilibrium takes place. You detect balance here, all right? Monitor static equilibrium. Ampulla of the semicircular canals monitor dynamic equilibrium. So motion, to know when you're in motion and what direction the motion is. Oh, I talked over that break. Oops. All right, so the semicircular canals arranged at approximately right angles. Again, we live in a universe that has 3 spatial dimensions, and those are oriented for the 3 spatial dimensions of our universe. All right, that's how they're able to detect motion, no matter which direction you're going. Each one has a ampulla at the end, and that's where the receptors are. All right. Lateral semicircular canal horizontal, superior and posterior are proximally vertical. Okay. The cochlea itself, from the Latin word for snail, I thought it was Greek. I'm wrong, so it's Latin. I got that mixed up in my head. I've done this before too. That's just one of the many ways I fail everyone around me on a regular basis. The scala vestibuli ends at the oval window, all right, and scala tympani ends at the round window. The helicotrema connects the two. Cochlear duct, scala media, is in between the vestibuli and tympani. Vestibular membrane separates cochlear duct from scala vestibuli. This is helpful in the lab. What you do, notice how the scala tympani looks like sort of a nice perfect oval, but then the scala vestibuli kind of gets tilted or chopped off, and that's because of the vestibular membrane. So what you do is you look for which one of the compartments is at an angle or looks chopped off, and then that's going to be the vestibular membrane, therefore that's the scala vestibuli, and whichever one is left over is the scala tympani. So in the labs, I tell students that helps them orient themselves to the model we have, and they can tell which is which.